What would I do if guys in balaclavas came and tried to drag somebody away? Would I try to pull them off? Would I be brave? I want to think I'd be brave, but I don't know, and that not knowing terrifies me.
You've recently announced that, along with two other Yale professors, including your husband, Timothy Snyder, that you're going to be leaving the US and moving to Canada. Can you just explain what has made you come to that decision?
It was a complex family decision. I've taught at Yale for almost 20 years now. I'm a professor of history there. It's been an incredibly privileged place to teach. I've loved teaching there. But there are also, a host of reasons why people might not spend their whole career at one institution. I've long been drawn to the University of Toronto. I'm both a Jew and a historian of Eastern Europe. So you could say the neurotic catastrophism is a bit overdetermined. My impulse already in 2016, the day after the election, my visceral impulse was to get out. I felt like, okay, we have two little kids, lesson of 1933, better to get out sooner rather than later. And so I've been watching the situation with extreme anxiety. If I understood much sooner than most Americans what was happening and what could happen and the ominous signs when Trump first came on the political scene as a presidential candidate in late 2015, I would just say it's not because I would in any way claim to be smarter than most Americans, but because I was watching what was happening in Russia and Ukraine. And I saw where this kind of post-truth, postmodern neo-totalitarianism could go.
Was there one event in particular that made you think, right, this is it, we have to get out of here?
There were so many such events. I could feel the reign of terror spiraling. But again, I'm both a historian of totalitarianism, and a neurotic Jew, so this is overdetermined. There was an extraordinary sermon that Bishop Buddha gave at the time of the inauguration, asking the president to have mercy on those who were vulnerable. And immediately afterwards, there were calls to do violence against this woman, including by a Republican member of Congress who said she should be deported. And you could feel this purging impulse. You could feel that we were about to spiral into a reign of terror. But there were the Oval Office meeting with Zelensky, that was for me personally one of the things that kind of pushed me over the edge. I've rarely been so viscerally angry looking at a screen. And it wasn't the violence, the sense that you have Vance and Trump saying, you have to say thank you. You must say thank you. You haven't acknowledged your gratitude. For me, as a historian of totalitarianism, this is what the Stalinist secret police interrogators were saying to the people they were interrogating. This is what the victims of the show trials were made to say, to thank their executioners as they were being led to their deaths. This motif of domestic violence, you must express your gratitude to the party, for you haven't expressed it. It was just repulsive, and Trump saying, you're not holding any cards, and Zelensky saying, we're not playing cards. And the profound moment that exposed that you're dealing with people for whom there are no first principles. You're looking into this abyss of moral nihilism. Everything is a transaction. Everything is a deal. Confronted with a man who actually feels responsible, for the lives of millions of people. And the humiliation of him and the attempt to humiliate him, I just felt was grotesque. And Lindsey Graham then got on television immediately afterwards and said, Donald Trump just gave us a masterclass in putting America first. And I tweeted back at him, I said, Donald Trump just gave us a masterclass in moral nihilism, and Lindsey Graham just gave us a masterclass in selling one's soul to the devil.
How bad do you think that it could potentially get in the US?
I think it could get very bad, but I feel like the subtitle of the present moment could be vindication of the neurotic catastrophist. I mean, one of the things that has affected me most viscerally, because I'm a professor, are the sudden, the zieloni człowieczki, let's call them, like the little green men or the guys in mask, from ICE, from wherever they are, coming and taking away foreign students on the street. and throwing them in detention centers with no access to anything. As a professor, I've never been very involved in university administration, and to some extent institutions are abstractions to me, which perhaps is unfair to them. But what is very real to me are my students. You come into the classroom, you're advising students, your job is to protect those students. And if your priority is not to look out for your students, you have no business being in a classroom. I mean, I was just recently back at Yale meeting with some of my advisees, undergraduates and graduate students who I still work with and I will continue to work with for as long as they want to work with me. I've never abandoned any of my students anywhere. A couple of them are from Ukraine. Many of my students have always been foreigners. Yale is a big university. There's a high percentage of foreign students. And I'm an East Europeanist, so I probably have an even higher than average number of foreign students. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm sitting in the dining hall with them. I'm walking past the library. We're sitting in a coffee shop. What would I do if guys in balaclavas came and tried to drag somebody away? Would I try to pull them off? Would I be brave? I mean, I would like to think that I would, although I'm a middle-aged woman who's not particularly strong, so I probably wouldn't have much of a chance. Would I try at least to pull the mask off? Would I scream? Would I videotape something? Would I start crying? Would I get scared and run away? I want to think I'd be brave, but I don't know, and that not knowing terrifies me.
Some people have sort of described the announcement of you guys moving to Canada as sort of a canary in the coal mine moment. Have you had other academics or other people expressing the same kind of fears and desires to leave America?
Yes, definitely. I mean, but it works both ways, and I in no way feel morally superior to people who have made the courageous decision to stay. I know a lot of people who would like to leave. I know a lot of people who feel a moral imperative to stay. I know a lot of people who are torn. I feel quite guilty, about leaving sense because I do feel that, America is going under. And I've watched, because I've been so personally and intimately involved, if from a distance and vicariously, with this gruesome war that the Russians are carrying out in Ukraine, I know how the Ukrainians feel, about the Russian opposition, and I know how they feel about the people who resisted and lost. I know how my Russian oppositionist friends feel confronted with the full-scale invasion, 3 years ago and saying, okay, we have failed and that failure is somehow it's irremediable and unforgivable. And no matter how hard we fought, it wasn't enough. And I understand why Ukrainians are resentful, and I in no way feel morally superior to the Russian oppositionists who have fled. I don't feel like I'm particularly courageous. I don't feel like I'm willing to go to prison. I don't feel like I would hold up particularly well in prison. I do feel that I will continue to speak out. And one of the appeals of the monk school is that people there have gone through an incredible amount of trouble, including the donors for these positions, to create ideal conditions for the work that Tim and Jason and I want to do there. So I'm hoping, if anything, that our voices will be stronger there. But that said, my impulse was to take my kids and get out of a situation that seemed very dark and very frightening to me.
Yourself and your husband in particular have been really, really strong advocates for the Ukrainian cause. It's obviously hugely appreciated over here in Ukraine. Are you concerned that by leaving the US that Ukraine is losing two voices within the country where they're possibly needed the most right now?
That has not been my top concern because I don't actually anticipate being less effective from here than I would be there. The thing that is crushing, is feeling like I can no longer have any influence in what is going on in Washington because I'm an enemy of the current regime. I wrote an op-ed back in October for Project Syndicate, in which I was very critical of Biden's reluctance to abolish the restrictions on where Ukraine could use American weapons. And I wrote that in a sense, both very critical of Biden, calling on him to break out of his paradigm and let Ukraine strike back, but from a position of somebody who was empathetic to Biden and empathetic to his concerns and empathetic to that regime and felt like or the empathetic to the Democratic government, or at least the Democratic administration, and feeling that when I went to Washington or when I talked to people there, not that I'm such a terribly important person, but that I did potentially have some kind of influence, that there were people in positions there that I could have conversations with who were open to listening to the experiences I had had in Ukraine, to the experiences my friends and colleagues were having in Ukraine. I no longer feel that that's true because those people are no longer in power in Washington. And people like myself are enemies of the people in power in Washington, which is not to say that there's nobody trying. I mean, I think Chris Murphy's really trying. Jamie Murphy's really trying. Jasmine Crockett is trying heroically. The crashing of any little bit of influence I might have, I don't actually feel that that's related to what university I'm teaching at. I think that that's unfortunately related to the change of power in Washington.
Your support is central to help us keeping the world informed about what's at stake in Ukraine. Consider becoming a member to help the Kyiv Independent provide locally produced journalism from Ukraine to the world.